When Kate returned with a mysterious smile and news of a baby, Jake thought their life would be perfect, but one text on her phone unleashed a web of lies that made him question everything. Can he escape the trap of betrayal, or will the shadows of her secrets catch up with him where he least expects them? Jake Miller, a 34-year-old engineer from Seattle, stood in the kitchen of his suburban two-bedroom home, the faint hum of the espresso machine filling the air. It was 7:45 a.m., and the soft gray light of a Pacific Northwest morning seeped through the blinds. His wife, Kate, a 31-year-old marketer, was due back any minute from a 2-week conference in San Francisco. He'd spent the last hour tidying up, wiping down the counters, fluffing the pillows on their worn leather couch, and draping her favorite blanket, the one with the Friends logo, over the armrest. She'd binge-watched that show a dozen times, and he could still hear her laughing at Ross's awkward antics. It was the little things like that, her laugh, her quirks, that had made him fall for her. He adjusted the blanket one more time, his fingers lingering on the soft fabric. After his first girlfriend, Sarah, cheated on him 7 years ago, he'd sworn he'd never trust anyone blindly again. That betrayal had gutted him, left him sleepless, staring at the ceiling of his old Tacoma apartment, wondering how he'd missed the signs. But Kate was different. She'd walked into his life like a burst of sunlight, steady and warm, and he'd let his guard down. 3 years of marriage, a cozy house near Lake Washington, and a life he'd never dared to dream of. They'd built something real. Or so he thought. The espresso machine beeped, snapping him out his thoughts. He poured a shot into her favorite mug, the one with Boss Lady scrawled in gold cursive, and set it on the counter. She'd been gone for 2 weeks, and the house felt hollow without her. Too quiet, too still. Work had kept him buried in deadlines for a new bridge project, and her texts from the conference had been short, sporadic. Busy day, she'd write, or miss you, talk soon. He'd chalked it up to her packed schedule. Digital marketing conferences were chaotic, she'd told him that 100 times. But now, as he waited, a faint unease gnawed at him, like a splinter he couldn't quite find. The front door creaked open, and there she was. Kate stepped inside, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her navy blazer wrinkled from travel. She looked tired, circles under her eyes, shoulders slumping, but her smile was warm, familiar. She dropped her suitcase by the door and crossed the room in 3 quick strides. "Hey," she said, wrapping her arms around him. He pulled her close, breathing in the faint scent of her lavender shampoo, and for a moment, everything felt right again. "Welcome home," he murmured into her hair. She hugged him tighter, then stepped back, her hazel eyes sparkling with something he couldn't quite read. "I've got news," she said, reaching into her tote bag. She pulled out a small white stick and held it up, a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. "Jake, we're going to be parents." Her voice cracked with excitement, and she laughed, a little breathless. Jake stared at the test, his heart thudding in his chest. "A baby," he said, a grin breaking across his face. He grabbed her hands, pulling her into another hug. "Kate, wow, that's incredible." She nodded, laughing again, and he felt a rush of joy bubble up inside him. A kid. Their kid. He could already picture it. Tiny sneakers in the hall, a crib in the spare room, Kate singing lullabies in that off-key way she did when she thought no one was listening. But then his mind snagged on something. "Wait," he said, stepping back, still holding her hands. "When did this happen?" The last few months had been a blur. His late nights at the office, her constant trips to Portland, LA, San Francisco. They'd barely had time to sit down for dinner, let alone anything else. He tried to rewind the calendar in his head, but the pieces didn't fit. Kate tilted her head, her smile softening. "You don't remember? That night before I left. The one where we opened that bottle of Pinot and watched the rain from the porch? You were exhausted, but we made it work." She winked, playful, teasing. "Guess you're more potent than you think, huh?" Jake forced a laugh, nodding. "Yeah, must be," he said, but his voice sounded thin even to him. That night, he remembered the wine, the rain tapping on the roof, how he'd crashed on the couch after a 14-hour shift. Had they really? He wanted to believe her. God, he did, but her tone felt too light, too rehearsed, like she was reading from script. He shook it off, blaming the fatigue, the shock of the news. "I'm just still processing," he said, squeezing her hands. This is huge. It is, she agreed, kissing his cheek. I'm gonna shower. Long flight. Then we'll celebrate, okay? She grabbed her mug and headed upstairs, leaving him standing there, the test still on the counter like a tiny grenade. He picked it up, staring at those two lines, trying to feel the joy again. But that splinter of doubt was back, sharper now, digging deeper. Later that night, he jolted awake at 2:03 a.m., the room dark except for the faint glow of Kate's phone on her nightstand. She was asleep beside him, her breathing steady, one arm flung across the pillow. The phone buzzed again, and he glanced over, his stomach tightening. The screen lit up with a text. Tyler. He bought it? Don't forget Plan B. Jake froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. Tyler? Plan B. He reached for the phone, then stopped, his hand hovering. Who the hell was Tyler? And what hadn't Kate told him? Jake sat at the kitchen table, the espresso machine silent now, its hum replaced by the low drone of morning traffic outside their Lake Washington home. It was 6:30 a.m., and Kate was still upstairs, the faint sound of the shower humming through the ceiling. He hadn't slept after seeing that text. Tyler? He bought it? Don't forget Plan B. And his mind had been churning ever since, replaying it like a stuck record. Who was Tyler? Why was he texting her at 2 a.m.? And what the hell was Plan B? He'd almost unlocked her phone to dig deeper, but the guilt of snooping had stopped him, barely. Now, in the cold light of day, he wasn't sure he could let it go. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake the fog of exhaustion. 3 years ago, Kate had walked in his life at a backyard barbecue in Portland, thrown by his buddy Mark from college. Jake could still picture it. The smoky tang of ribs on the grill, the clink of beer bottles, and Kate standing there in a denim jacket, laughing at something a guy next to her had said. That guy was Tyler. Tyler Grayson, a freelance designer with a loud mouth and a resume he loved to flaunt. Just signed with Nike, he'd bragged that night, his arms slung casually around Kate's shoulders like she was his trophy. Jake had caught his eye across the yard, and Tyler had smirked, tossing out a jab. You think she'll stick with a numbers nerd like you, Miller? Jake hadn't taken the bait. Tyler was all hot air, the kind of guy who peaked in high school and coasted on charm. But Kate had drifted over to Jake anyway, asking about his bridge designs with a curiosity that felt genuine. They'd hit it off, her sharp wit matching his quiet humor, and by the end of the night, Tyler was left sulking by the cooler while Jake and Kate swapped numbers. She'd chosen him, not the flashy asshole with the ego. That's what he'd told himself, anyway. But now, that name, Tyler, lit up her phone like a ghost from the past. Was it the same guy? The shower cut off upstairs, and Jake's gaze drifted to Kate's tote bag, slumped by the couch where she dropped it. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. But his feet moved anyway, carrying him across the room. He unzipped it quietly, glancing at the stairs, and rummaged past her charger and a crumpled conference badge, Digital Trends Summit, San Francisco, until his fingers brushed something stiff. A ticket stub. He pulled it out. The Killers, live at the Fillmore, San Francisco, 2 Fridays ago. The date stabbed at him. She'd texted him that night, saying she was stuck late with the team. He'd been in bed, half dead from a 12-hour shift, picturing her in some sterile conference room. Not at a goddamn concert. His jaw tightened. He opened Instagram on his phone, scrolling to her profile. Nothing from that night, just a vague SF Vibes post with a skyline shot. Suspicion tugged harder, and he typed Tyler Grayson Designs into the search bar, a handle he vaguely remembered from years back. There was a photo from the same night, Tyler grinning with a beer in hand, stage lights glowing behind him. Caption: Night I won't forget. The Killers killed it. No tag for Kate, but the coincidence was too sharp to ignore. Footsteps thudded down the stairs, and Jake shoved the ticket back, retreating to the table just as Kate appeared. She was in yoga pants and a loose sweater, toweling her damp hair. Morning, she said, flashing a sleepy smile. You're up early. Yeah, couldn't sleep, he said, forcing his voice steady. Thinking about the baby. It wasn't a total lie. She nodded, grabbing her mug from the counter and sipping the cold espresso with a grimace. How was the conference? He asked, watching her face. Exhausting, she said, leaning against the counter. Sessions all day, networking all night. You know how it is. Her tone was casual, but her eyes flicked away, lingering on the fridge a beat too long. Anything exciting here? Just work? He said, then took a breath. Find any good music down there? It was a soft probe, just enough to test her. She laughed a little too quick. Not really, too busy for that. Though some folks dragged me to a corporate thing at the Fillmore. Barely heard the band over the chatter. She shrugged, setting the mug down. Why? No reason, he said, nodding. Just curious. The Fillmore. She'd handed him the lie without blinking. Smooth, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. His stomach twisted, but he kept his face neutral. Sounds like a grind. It was, she said, stretching. I'm crashing today. Jet lag's brutal. She kissed his forehead and headed for the couch, leaving him with the sinking feeling that he'd just been played. Corporate event, his ass. Tyler's smug grin from that Instagram post burned in his mind. Same old Tyler. Always lurking, always pushing. Had he been there with her? Was he still in the picture? The day dragged on. Kate napped, then scrolled her phone, keeping it tilted just out of his sight. He tried to focus on work emails, bridge schematics, stress tests, but his thoughts kept circling back to that ticket, that text. By evening, he convinced himself to let it go. Maybe she just needed a break, a night out. Maybe Tyler was a coincidence. But then, as he washed dishes after dinner, he heard it, a muffled whisper from the bathroom where she'd gone to brush her teeth. He turned off the faucet, straining to listen. Her voice was low, urgent. Tyler, he asked about the concert. I don't know how to get out of this. A pause, then quieter. Just keep it together, okay? Jake's grip tightened on the sponge, water dripping onto the counter. The room spun for a second, and he realized he wasn't imagining it anymore. Tyler wasn't just a ghost. He was here, now, and Kate was lying to his face. What the hell was she hiding? Jake stood in the kitchen, the sponge still dripping in his hand, the sink's silence amplifying the echo of Kate's whispered words from the bathroom. Tyler, he asked about the concert. I don't know how to get out of this. His chest tightened, a mix of anger and dread coiling like a spring. It was 8:47 p.m., and the Seattle night pressed against the windows, a damp chill seeping through the glass. Kate had come out a minute later, toothbrush in hand, flashing a quick goodnight before disappearing upstairs. She hadn't noticed his stillness, the way his eyes tracked her every move. He couldn't sleep, not after that. He dumped the sponge and grabbed his laptop, sinking into the couch. The friend's blanket mocked him from the armrest. Her favorite show, her favorite lie. He thought back to a rainy night 2 years ago, curled up here after a fight about his long hours. She'd looked him in the eye, her voice steady. I hate lies more than anything, Jake. Promise me we'll always be straight with each other. He'd promised, and so had she. That memory sliced through him now, sharp and bitter. Ironic, considering the web she was spinning. How long had she been playing him? He opened her email, hands shaking as he typed her password. Rainier 2020, a nod to their first hike together. She hadn't changed it, assuming he'd never look. Inbox, work stuff, spam, then there. A message from a Dr. Patel, dated yesterday. Kate Grayson, your 7-week ultrasound is scheduled for next Tuesday. Congratulations. 7 weeks. He froze, the math slamming into him like a freight train. 7 weeks ago, he'd been in Chicago for a 3-day engineering seminar, October 7th to 9th. He'd texted her from the hotel, exhausted, and she'd replied, caught a cold, stuck in bed. Miss you. No mention of him coming home, no wine-soaked reunion. He'd landed late on the 9th and crashed on this very couch, too wiped to even unpack. His throat burned. 7 weeks, he muttered, staring at the screen. He pulled up his calendar, double-checking. Yep, he'd been 800 miles away. No chance. He stumbled upstairs, heart pounding, and confronted her shadow in the bedroom doorway. Kate, he said, voice low, how are we 7 weeks along? I was in Chicago. She sat up in bed, the phone slipping from her hand onto the comforter. Her eyes widened for a split second before softening into a smile. What? Oh, babe, you're overthinking it. You came back, remember? We had that night. The wine, the porch. You were half asleep, but it happened. She laughed, reaching for him. Come to bed, you're stressed. I crashed that night, he said, stepping back. I didn't even make it upstairs. Try again. Her smile faltered, but she rallied fast. Jake, you'd had a long trip. Maybe you don't remember. We'd missed each other. It was quick. You're making this weird. She patted the bed, voice coaxing. Let's not fight over something this happy. He wanted to believe her. God, he did, but her words rang hollow, like a sales pitch. Yeah, he muttered, turning away. Sure. He retreated to the guest room, locking the door, her hate lies, promise looping in his head like a cruel joke. Sleep didn't come. By morning, a nagging itch in his groin, something he'd ignored for days, turned into a dull ache. He booked a doctor's appointment, dread pooling in his gut. The clinic was sterile, the wait endless. Dr. Nguyen, a no-nonsense guy in his 50s, delivered the news with zero fanfare. You've got gonorrhea, Mr. Miller. Caught it recently, within the last month or two. Treatable, but you'll need to tell your partner. Jake's ears rang. He hadn't been with anyone but Kate. Not in years. My wife's pregnant, he said, voice flat. The doctor raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. Talk to her, he said, handing over a prescription. Jake drove home in a daze, the rain streaking his windshield. Gonorrhea. Kate hadn't caught a cold 7 weeks ago. She'd caught something else and given it to him. The pieces clicked, ugly and clear. He parked, stormed inside, and grabbed her laptop again. This time, he dug in her Slack, her work chat app, praying he was wrong. Buried in a thread with Tyler G., a message from 6 weeks back. If we're quiet, he won't suspect a thing. See you at the hotel. Another 2 days later. You're a genius. Dumbass will believe anything. His hands clenched into fists, the screen blurring as rage boiled up. Tyler Grayson. That smug bastard from the barbecue, the concert, her lover. The baby wasn't his. The life they'd built was a lie. He slammed the laptop shut, breath ragged, and paced the living room. Kate was at yoga, her Tuesday routine, giving him an hour to decide. Confront her? Leave? His phone buzzed, work ignored. He needed proof, a plan, something, but first he needed air. He grabbed his keys, heading for the porch when the doorbell rang. He yanked it open, expecting a delivery guy. Instead, Tyler Grayson stood there, rain dripping off his leather jacket, a smirk curling his lips. Hey, Miller, he said, voice dripping with mock cheer. We need to talk about Kate. Open the door, or I'll tell her you know everything. Jake's fist tightened on the knob, his pulse roaring. Tyler didn't just text. He was here, in the flesh, ready to twist the knife. What the hell did he want now? Jake stood frozen at the door, rain drumming on the porch roof, his knuckles white around the knob as Tyler Grayson smirked at him. Open up, Miller, Tyler said, his voice slick with arrogance. Or I'll call Kate right now and tell her you're onto us. Your move. The leather jacket glistened wet, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, but that cocky grin, same one from the Portland barbecue, cut deeper than the cold. Jake's mind raced. Tyler wasn't just a ghost in text anymore. He was here, flesh and blood, daring him to blink. Get off my porch, Jake growled, slamming the door in Tyler's face. He locked it, heart pounding, and heard a muffled laugh through the wood. You'll regret that, nerd, Tyler called, his footsteps fading into the downpour. Jake leaned against the frame, breath shallow. Tyler didn't scare him. Not yet, but the threat did. If he told Kate, she'd spin it first, play the victim. He couldn't let them control the board. Not anymore. He grabbed his phone and dialed Linda Carter, a divorce attorney he'd met at a networking event last year. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp. Jake? What's up? He spilled it all. Kate's pregnancy, the gonorrhea, the Slack messages, Tyler at the door. Linda didn't flinch. Sounds like a setup, she said. If she's passing off his kid as yours, she could claim half your assets. House, savings, everything. We move fast. Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m. Then she laid it out. Transfer the house to a trust, move his cash offshore, protect what's his. She won't see it coming, Linda added. Trust me. Jake hung up, a plan taking shape. He called his bank next, rerouted his savings to a Cayman Islands account, a trick he'd heard from a coworker dodging an ex. Then his crypto app, $20,000 into Bitcoin, untraceable. The house was trickier. Linda would handle the trust paperwork, naming his sister as beneficiary. By noon tomorrow, Kate wouldn't touch a dime. He felt a grim satisfaction, like a boxer landing a counterpunch. She'd lied, cheated, given him a damn STD. Now she'd pay. But he needed more than defense. He texted a private investigator, Dave Ruiz, a guy Mark had vouched for after a business scam. Need dirt on my wife, Kate Grayson, and Tyler Grayson. Urgent. Dave replied. On it, $500 upfront, results in 48 hours. Jake sent the payment, then sat back, staring at the friend's blanket. Her hate lies line echoed again, a cruel punchline. 7 weeks pregnant, screwing Tyler, plotting. What else was she hiding? Kate breezed in at 6 p.m., yoga mat slung over her shoulder, all smiles. Hey, babe, she said, kissing his cheek. Missed you today. He nodded, forcing a grin, playing the part. Missed you too, he lied, watching her drop her bag, the same one with the concert ticket. She chattered about her class, oblivious, while he cooked pasta, keeping his back to her. Every word she said felt like a mask, and he hated how good she was at it. Dave's first update came at midnight via email. Tracked them to a Starbucks near Pike Place, 3 p.m. today. Video attached. Jake opened it on his laptop. Sound off. Kate was asleep upstairs. There they were, Kate and Tyler at a corner table, lattes in hand, laughing. Tyler leaned in, brushing her arm. She didn't pull away. Then, clear as day, Tyler's voice through the tinny audio. Jake's a loser. Thinks he's got it all figured out. We've already won. Kate giggled, sipping her drink. He'll never check, she said. Dave's note followed. They're not just hooking up. Sounds like they're after your money. More tomorrow. Jake's fists clenched, the screen searing into his retinas. A plan for his money. Alimony, the house, his 401k, all of it. Tyler's "We've won" wasn't just bravado. It was a victory lap. He forwarded the video to Linda, adding, they're in it together. Lock everything down. Her reply pinged back, done by noon. File for divorce after, grounds, infidelity. She's screwed. The next morning, he met Linda at her downtown office, a sleek space with a view of the Sound. She slid papers across the desk, trust docs, bank transfers, divorce filings. Sign here, she said. House is safe, money's gone. She'll get nothing but a headache. He signed, hand steady, a weight lifting. By 11 a.m., it was done. He drove home, packed a duffel, clothes, laptop, keys, and left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter, no note. He didn't owe her an explanation. He checked into a motel off I-90, an hour east of Seattle, the neon sign flickering in the dusk. Rain tapped the roof as he sat on the lumpy bed, exhaling for the first time in days. The house was empty now, Kate due back any minute. He pictured her face, confusion, then panic when she saw the envelope. He'd won this round. Tyler could smirk all he wanted. They'd underestimated him. His phone buzzed, a blocked number. He answered, cautious. Kate's voice crackled through, shrill and desperate. Jake, where are you? You can't just disappear. I'm pregnant with your kid. Come home, or I'll tell everyone you forced me into this. He gripped the phone, her lie a fresh slap. Forced her? She was scrambling, clawing for leverage, but he wasn't biting. What would she do next? Jake sat on the edge of the motel bed, the phone still warm in his hand from Kate's frantic call. I'm pregnant with your kid. I'll tell everyone you forced me. Her voice echoing in his skull. It was 7:32 p.m., and the rain outside the I-90 motel had slowed to a drizzle, the neon sign casting a faint red glow through the blinds. He didn't answer her. She was grasping at straws, hurling lies to drag him back, but he was done playing her game. He blocked the number, tossed the phone aside, and leaned back, staring at the stained ceiling. For the first time in days, he felt the knot in his chest loosen. He'd slipped her trap, house locked in a trust, money stashed offshore, divorce papers waiting. She had nothing left to hold over him. 2 weeks later, he was gone from Seattle for good. He found a cabin on the shores of Flathead Lake in Montana. Remote, cheap, surrounded by pines and the kind of quiet that drowned out the noise in his head. He quit his engineering job, cashed out his vacation days, and bought a used pickup and a fishing rod. The cabin was small, wood floors, a stone fireplace, a porch overlooking the water, but it was his. He named the lanky black Labrador he adopted Rocky, after the boxer who never gave up. Together, they started a YouTube channel, Flathead Days, simple videos of Jake fishing, chopping wood, Rocky bounding after sticks. This is freedom, he'd say into the camera, half to himself, half to the strangers watching. The clips took off, 10K subscribers in a month, then 50K, ad money trickling in. Comments poured in. You're living the dream, man. Rocky's the real star. For the first time since Kate, he smiled without forcing it. Back in Seattle, Kate's world unraveled. She'd stormed into Linda's office the day after finding the divorce papers, clutching her belly, demanding half the house. Linda shut her down cold. "It's in a trust, Mrs. Grayson. Nothing's in Jake's name anymore. Good luck fighting that." The judge agreed. Infidelity, backed by Dave's Starbucks video and Jake's medical records, tanked her case. She got nothing but a court order to vacate by month's end. Then the baby came, a girl, Ella, born 6 months later. A DNA test, pushed by Linda's ruthless follow-up, confirmed Tyler as the father. Kate sued him for child support, and a grim-faced judge ordered $800 a month. Peanuts, but it was something. Tyler's life, meanwhile, crashed harder. The design gig he'd bragged about, some startup tied to Nike, fired him after rumors of the scandal leaked. He'd burned cash on bars and bad bets, dodging Kate's calls until the support order hit. Then came the news, splashed across a local blog. Jake stumbled on one night. Seattle man injured in DUI crash. Tyler, drunk off cheap whiskey, had peeled out of a dive bar parking lot, fleeing a hulking loan shark named Vince Russo, some ex-Vegas thug he owed $15,000. He'd swerved into a tree, shattering both legs. Photos showed him in a hospital bed, gaunt, one eye swollen shut, crutches propped against the wall. Jake scrolled the article, Rocky snoring at his feet, and muttered, "Karma's a bitch." Kate tried reaching out. 6 months into his Montana life, Jake opened YouTube to upload a trout fishing clip and saw her comment under his last video. "Jake, it's me. I'm so sorry. I was stupid, selfish. I ruined us. Forgive me." He stared at it, the cursor blinking. Part of him remembered her laugh, the good days, their first hike up Mount Rainier, her hand in his. But then he saw Tyler's smirk, heard her whisper in the bathroom, felt the sting of that clinic visit. He typed back, "Live your life, Kate. I found mine." He hit send, closed the laptop, and grabbed Rocky's leash. They walked to the lake, the sun dipping low, and he cast his line into the water, the ripples spreading wide. He'd made peace, or close enough. The channel paid the bills, Rocky kept him sane, and the woods washed away the bitterness. He didn't need Seattle, didn't need her. He was free. But freedom, it turned out, wasn't the end. 3 nights later, he sat by the fireplace. Rocky curled up beside him, sorting through a stack of mail from a P.O. box he'd set up in Kalispell. Bills, junk, then a plain envelope. No return address, postmark Seattle. He tore it open, unfolding a single sheet of paper. The words were typed stark. "Montana's a nice hideout, Jake. Pretty lake, pretty dog. But I'm closer than you think. Ready to talk." His breath caught. He flipped the page. Nothing else, no signature. Rocky lifted his head, ears perked, as Jake reread it, pulse quickening. Seattle postmark. Kate. Tyler, dragging himself out of that hospital bed. Russo, sniffing out a new target. He stood, peering through the cabin's dark windows. The woods were silent, the lake a black mirror under the moon. He'd run 700 miles to escape them, build a new life from scratch, but someone had found him. He locked the door, grabbed his fishing knife from the table, and sat back down, the letter in his lap. Rocky whined, nudging his hand, but Jake barely noticed. His eyes stayed on the trees outside, waiting for a shadow to move. Whoever it was, they'd picked the wrong guy to mess with twice.